Good morning and welcome to the final day of the 2022 Integration Symposium here at Fuller Theological Seminary.
Well, thank you, Brad. So I did want to also mention, the other thing I want to mention to you is to bring up some additional resources that I want to make. I can't say I want to make this available. I just want to make you aware of. So in case you want to go deeper into the science or the spirit or the practice of gratitude, from those I've heard from, I know a lot of you have been, trafficking in the area of gratitude yourselves for a long time. But there are some additional resources that could be useful at some point. Brad is very kind and has mentioned my own books, but I want to mention some other people's books that I found very meaningful and very illuminating. So the first one is entitled The Gratitude Factor, Enhancing Your Life Through Grateful Living. This is written by a good friend of mine, Charles Shelton. Charlie was a Jesuit priest, but also a psychologist at Regis University in Denver, Colorado for many, many years. I would say of all the people that I know who have been contributing to the scholarship on gratitude, I think he's the deepest thinker about gratitude, especially from a Jesuit perspective, being a Jesuit priest. As you would expect, focus a lot about spiritual exercises and Ignatius Loyola and that sort of thing, but he's also very up to date on the research and clinical work because he saw clients as well. Tragically, Charlie's life was cut short several years ago. I think it was about 3 or 4 years after this book came out. The book came out in 2010, and he died very unexpectedly. I think he had like a brain aneurysm, so it was tragic. He had so much more to contribute to teach us about gratitude. So I recommend this book very much. And of course, you can get all of these, in your usual places like Amazon or other online or in-person stores. The second, let's go to the third book. So Wake Up Grateful by Christy Nelson is an amazing book. And if any of you have any familiarity with any of these books, go ahead and put a plug in the chat as well. I love this book. And Christy Nelson is the executive director of the Network for Grateful Living, which is the organization that was started by Brother David Steindl-Rast, who we mentioned yesterday. And Brother David is the worldwide expert on gratefulness and grateful living. And so this book came out about a year ago. And what's really remarkable about it is that because Christy had been through so much herself in terms of her own struggles and journeys and adversities, and her battle with cancer that she recovered from. And she knows gratitude, deeply and broadly, as does Charlie. So I highly recommend this book, Wake Up Grateful. And then the book in the middle is a book of gratitude practices. It's entitled The Grateful Practice Workbook and Gratitude Journal. And there's 33 chapters, each one with multiple different activities, actionables, things you could easily build a curriculum on for small groups or large groups or just for any purpose whatsoever for those who want to go deeper and actually want to, build and develop the practice of gratitude in their lives. So it's a workbook and a journal. And so these are just 3 additional resources that I wanted to call to your attention. Okay, so today I want to focus your attention on, as I promised you yesterday, just some ideas I've been having. I want to talk about some new directions in the science and in the practice of gratitude and the application of gratitude. And one of those that I've been thinking a little bit about recently, not as much as a lot of people have, but I've just begun to think about what's the connection between gratitude and thinking about life from a grateful, perspective or through a lens of gratefulness and its potential connection to, planetary well-being or planetary flourishing. So I spent the last couple of days talking about gratitude and human flourishing from the perspective of happiness, well-being, thriving, as Pam mentioned yesterday. And I think it's really difficult for us to flourish individually or even collectively. If the planet is not flourishing, if the planet is languishing, how can we flourish individually? and collectively. So is it possible that somehow, some way, in some, small or perhaps even, large steps, that gratitude can make a difference for combating all the issues surrounding climate change? So that's what I want to focus your attention on today. But before I do that, just mention over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of applications of gratitude in different spheres or different domains of life. So, we had the science, the science of gratitude began roughly, as I mentioned the other day, 24, 25 years ago. A lot of good basic research had been conducted. And then we started to see emerge over the last decade applications and extensions of the science of gratitude in different settings, right? Research-based gratitude interventions in places like hospitals, for example. I mean, workplace settings in general, but especially it seems in hospitals and healthcare centers. And I mentioned this on Wednesday, the realization that gratitude is good medicine, that gratitude matters, both for patients as well as providers. And there's some really, really good research on the benefits of gratitude physically, physiologically, and in terms of also the mental health benefits. So that's been one area that's been quite active, and a lot of good research and implementing interventions within hospital settings. Another one has been within school settings, educational settings. So teaching gratitude is part of maybe social emotional learning, ways in which gratitude can be brought into various curricula, lessons plans, or even just, visual things like gratitude walls, which are common now in schools as well as in workplaces and hospitals. There's a place where people can write down things they're grateful for, and you have a nice visual aid there to help, people just keep in front and center in their consciousness what it is and who they are grateful to. So it's very nice to see that within school settings. So that's been another one. So, and even in churches of all places, guess what? We see gratitude being implemented, or at least much more attention being given to. And if I actually found this online, I think this is in the UK, the Grateful Church, right? Which begs the question, what are other churches if they're not grateful? But anyway, it's kind of neat to see gratitude being applied in real world settings, whether they're workplaces, schools, churches, and so on. So I think that's just the natural trajectory of the evolution of the science of gratitude. Now that we know that it works, how can we implement this? How can we disseminate and translate the results of the research into places that really, really need it? But politics is an interesting one, right? You don't hear much gratitude amongst politicians, or gratitude for politicians or for our elected leaders. In fact, usually just the opposite. You don't hear many political candidates running on a platform of gratitude. We want to make America grateful again, or something like that. You just don't hear that. That reminds me, some years ago, I was at an event, and the special guest speaker of the night was Jeb Bush, and it was before he was running for president. So this was about 7 or 8 years ago, and there was a meet and greet, and I talked to him for just a minute, and I told him what I did. He said, send me your stuff. Like, send me some articles or some books on gratitude he was really interested in. And I thought, well, okay, he's going to run on a platform, of gratitude. So I sent him some stuff, and he wrote a nice thank you note. Still have it on my wall because that's really cool, I thought, but never ran on that, didn't get elected. So maybe he should have. Maybe there should be some more gratitude in politics. Anyway, what about gratitude and the planet? Okay, planetary well-being. I go back to that first slide. How can we engage gratitude and perhaps some other what I call moral faculties besides gratitude? It's not the only one, but because that's the one that I've been focusing on, I'm going to focus on that today. We'll focus your attention on its connection to the environment, or in the context of environmental health, or planetary well-being, whichever term you happen to resonate with. Let me tell you how I got started on this, by the way. I didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, let's look at gratitude and climate change. I had never really thought that much about, I know this sounds awful, climate change. I was like so many others that, it was just kind of on the back burner. I didn't feel a sense of urgency about it. I figured it was one of those things that other people are going to take care of it. What could I possibly do as a professor or as an academic who, writes books and gives talks and spends his days, turning sentences around on the computer. I don't really have that much impact or power to do anything substantial. But then I was asked to give a talk up at Lake Tahoe. So UC Davis has like an extension campus up at the north shore of Lake Tahoe in Incline Village, very beautiful place. And I know a lot of you have undoubtedly been to Lake Tahoe. And I thought, well, one thing that I might want to talk about here is the connection between gratitude and the environment, because everyone is very environmentally conscious, especially at this program that was sponsoring me. And I didn't want to just give my usual presentation about gratitude and happiness and health, but I always tailor my talks, specifically to the needs and interests of the audience. And one of the questions that came up, I threw out to the audience, says, can you be grateful, to the environment? Does that even make any sense, right? The connection between gratitude and nature. I mean, think about how we've talked about gratitude over the past couple of days. There's a giver, there's a receiver, there's a benefit. The benefactor intends a benefit for you. What is nature intending us anything? Or are we just, experiencing some of the benefits just because we live in nature and rely on nature and are dependent on nature? So I started thinking about that. Does it even make sense, to posit gratitude to nature? Or is it something which is counterintuitive? And I'll try to unpack some of that with you in just a moment. But then also, second thing which got me thinking about gratitude in the environment, in natural context, was a movie scene from, I don't know if any of you have seen this movie, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Very interesting, Humphrey Bogart, 1920s in Mexico, where they're mining this mountain for gold. So background. So our younger son he's a junior in college now, 21, but for at least the last 10 years, very much interested in the West, the Western frontier, the Wild West, Old West, right? Every way you can, look at in terms of the history, the geography, the folklore, the culture. So frontiers just kind of inspire him. And so we watch a lot of, in fact, when he was applying to colleges, he would often write about this in his essays about the frontiers. He was asked, one of his essays, he was asked, if you taught a course in college, what would that course be? And I still remember he wrote about the frontier. He wanted to teach about the American frontier just because it really represents, the ability to overcome obstacles and to venture into dangerous, but, promising unknown places and spaces and that sort of thing. Anyway, so we watch a lot of Western films, a lot of Sergio Leone's films, especially. And one of those was The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Okay, so there's a point in the movie where this is John Huston, by the way. It was his movie. Okay, and there's an old prospector, actually played by John Huston's father, Walter Huston. He tells his partners before they leave the mountain, so they've gotten the gold out of the mountain, and he says they have to restore the mountain to its natural state. He says, we've wounded this mountain, and it's our duty to close her wounds. It's the least we can do to show our gratitude for all the wealth she's given us. Now, this is interesting because we would call this gratitude, which is directed to a mountain. Now, I said to you the other day that gratitude normally goes to agents, right? There's agents, whether they're other people or supernatural beings who are doing things for us, providing goods, benefits for us that we could not provide or do for ourselves. This is a mountain, right? A mountain is not an agent. Right? I think that's non-controversial, right? A mountain doesn't intend to do us a benefit. It doesn't make a decision. It doesn't have a desire to do good for us. It doesn't, sacrifice things for us. But he's saying, no, it gave us wealth, her wealth, right? So he's seeing gratitude as an appropriate response to the good that he has received. I thought, well, how does this even make sense? Does this cohere logically? How you could be grateful? We could say, well, he's anthropomorphizing. He's seeing, human intention, behind a mountain and all that sort of thing. But I think there's a way we can explain this if we make a distinction between two types of gratitude. So here's some basic questions that I suggested that day when I gave that talk at Lake Tahoe to this audience. Can we feel gratitude to the environment, first of all? Does that even make sense in cases like the one by that gold prospector? Now, conversely, if we don't care about the environment, if we don't have gratitude toward the environment, does failure to care imply ingratitude? Does nature deserve our gratitude? And by the way, as you might expect, the people at Lake Tahoe, 100%, unanimity there that they were unanimous saying, yes, that gratitude is deserving in the case of nature, that we can feel gratitude to the environment, that failure to care does imply ingratitude, and so on. And they weren't so much interested in all the nuances of the philosophical distinctions between different types of gratitude, but I know you guys are, so I just want to mention that because I think that's a way out of this dilemma. So I don't think that agency is always necessarily required when it comes to receiving a benefit. The point about gratitude is that we have a good, we know that the good is there quite apart from anything we did to deserve it. Typically, there's a giver, there's agency. Okay? But we recognize that it's unmerited or free. It's there, and we benefit from it in a variety of ways, as we certainly benefit from everything that the environment provides for us. So that's a good illustration where it might not be necessarily the case. And if we make a distinction between two types of gratitude, which philosophers have really been unpacking this and teasing this apart over the last several years, and I really appreciate their work here. Philosophers can be sticklers for conceptual exactness, and they do a really good job of saying there's at least two basic types of gratitude. There's gratitude to someone for something they provided for us, and that's primarily what we've talked about the last couple of days, right? Whether that giver is another person or God or some other supernatural agent, it's targeted, it's directed toward me or toward someone, and it comes from someone. It's triggered by a specific benefit or good that I've received. So we could say it's specific, it's focused, it's attached to a giver, it's personal, it's directed. It really represents a case of thankfulness, as Brother David makes that distinction between thankfulness and gratefulness, which is a broader concept. One of the best distinctions that's often made by the philosophers is between prepositional and propositional forms of gratitude. Prepositional is gratitude to, T-O, whereas propositional is gratitude for. So I can say I'm grateful to Brad, I'm grateful to you, for your faithfulness in listening to these lectures. We're grateful to someone for a benefit they provided for us, but we're grateful for something. We're grateful for the chance to talk about gratitude. We're grateful for the good weather we have in California, where some of you don't have such nice weather right now. We're grateful for technology. We're grateful for versus grateful to is different in a variety of specific ways. So it's non-targeted, it's more impersonal or transpersonal. Maybe gratefulness is a better term. And then it's non-agentic. So that will make sense in the case of that prospector saying, we're grateful to this mountain. He tended to see it as having agency, but you could say, well, no, the mountain doesn't intend or desire to provide us with a benefit, but there it is. And then propositional gratitude makes sense in that case. So I do think we can save the idea of gratitude to nature if we look at it through these different lenses of gratitude. So I think that makes sense. Okay. Now there is precedent for that. Okay. So Ursula Goodenough was a cell biologist. I think she's retired now for many years at Washington University in St. Louis. And she wrote a splendid book back in the early 90s entitled The Sacred Depths of Nature, Ursula Goodenough. And she talks about how, nature can evoke and activate very powerful religious emotions and sacred emotions, one of which is gratitude, as well as awe and joy and wonder and, sense of reverence and all of those things. She says, we are moved to awe and wonder at the grandeur, the richness of natural beauty. It fills us with joy and thanksgiving. Ursula, the sacred depths of nature. Okay, so much like yesterday, I tried to draw together a coalescence and consolidation of perspectives on gratitude and identity. I'm trying to do the same thing with respect to gratitude to nature to make a case for why gratitude to nature, first of all, makes sense it's rational, it's logical, and then by extension, we can think about perhaps gratitude being something which might inspire us to take better care of our planet and to engage in environmentally responsible actions. Okay, so moving along further, one of the things I like to do is when I talk about gratitude practices, I go through the usual suspects, the usual list of things, right? Like gratitude lists and gratitude journals and gratitude letters and gratitude visits and all those things we talked about the last couple of days. But I worry that one of the risks of this is that we leave gratitude as a totally cognitive activity, gratitude only from the neck up. And we know that there is a bodily component to gratitude. Dr. Young mentioned that on the first day about worship and the embodiment of gratitude. Gratitude is expressed throughout, our bodily activities, not just how we think, but how we feel, how we express it toward others or toward God. So one of the things which I sometimes recommend to people when they're thinking about some new and creative ways to feel gratitude is to think about grateful places or grateful spaces that you like to go. Is there a place which evokes in you a feeling of gratefulness? Or you're just so thankful when you go there? Beaches, oceans, right? Hawaii, that'll do it for me, and so on. And I'm thinking, why don't we just, immerse ourselves in these environments more often? It would seem to be a very surefire way to activate gratitude without having to go through all those, appraisals and cognitions about who gave me this and what do I have to do to return that good and how much did it cost them and when should I reciprocate, right? Hey, just take in beauty, right? Gardens, mountains, so nature, and we know that nature impacts our health. I've taught health psychology here for many, many decades, and I'll give a couple of lectures on the healing power of nature. This is a picture. You see that? That's a beach in Maine. That's Pine Point, Maine. Somebody said yesterday they were from Maine. I hope you're on the call today. You might recognize that. Pam King knows where Scarborough, Maine is. This is Pine Point Beach, which is one of my favorite grateful places that my wife and I go to every summer. I spent 5 years in college in Maine. My sister still lives there. One of the things we like to do. That's not what it looks like now, by the way. West Quad Head, thank you. That's not what it looks like right now. It's a little bit colder right now. But anyway, I think I have a picture of the two of us. So here's some actual proof that we were there. It's not just, a picture I pulled off the internet. Anyway, I just feel so relaxed, calm. It's like energized but calm at the same time. Just grateful that I've had the opportunity to attend a place that I went to when I was in college, back in the late 70s, and I've continued to go there. It hasn't changed. It's still the same, 35, 40 years later. So grateful places and spaces, we know that these can activate a deep sense of thankfulness or gratefulness. Norman Wiersba is a theologian at Duke University, and he has said a lot about gratitude in the context of nature, in the context of the environment, as a key indicator of what he calls ecological intelligence. And this is a quote from one of his chapters. I think this was entitled, "Thanks for the Dirt," why we should be grateful for the dirt, which sustains us and sustains all living organisms. And he says this: the world comes to us as a gift, as a given presence. Gratitude can be one of the most salient and powerful contexts for responsible environmental action. The knowledge and understanding we are after goes to the heart of our identity. So there's that I word again, identity. But beyond that, he says, when we are grateful, we acknowledge that what we receive is valuable and matters beyond what I may or may not be able to do with it. After all, life does not begin and end with us. The human story, in a sense, is meaningful and possible only because it arises within a dynamic evolutionary story that has an integrity of all its own. It results in the humble admission that we do not and cannot live alone, but must learn to organize our living so to be in better alignment with the living of others. So again, more and more, evidence, persuasive arguments that, you can tether together gratitude and the environment and nature, and then taking care of the environment, which would be the next step. So to answer the question, can we feel gratitude to the environment? I think so. Sorry, I would posit yes. That yes, because even though we might not see agency, we might see agency. Of course, from a theistic worldview, we would see the creation is given, and so that would make sense. But even if we don't, we say yes because there are natural systems that provide unearned and valuable benefits. As we just said, all the just the physiological and psychological benefits that nature is restorative and recuperative. When we're feeling stressed or depressed, or just want to feel more grateful or connected to the earth, we go into nature. So it does make sense. I think it is logical, it is rational to feel gratitude in these contexts. So that raises the question, which is now the essence and gist of my presentation here. Everything else has been setting the stage for it. Can gratitude help to combat climate change? Okay, along with Andrew Saracen at the Templeton World Charity Foundation, we wrote an article together that was published in Time magazine. It appeared last fall, right after the environmental summit in Europe last summer, or last fall, I guess it was November. Actually, I can't remember dates at all, but it was the Glasgow's where it was, right? The COP26 Climate Change Conference. And so we decided to write this editorial about the power of, thank you, there's the link right there. What are the ways in which gratitude might be beneficial? Now, I have to, contextualize this and give the usual sorts of warnings. Now, this doesn't mean that gratitude is going to solve all the problems, right? It's not to say, well, let's just, be grateful and then the climate change is going to go away and the temperature will go down and the seas, won't continue to rise and the ice caps will melt and all those things, right? So, but we start to speculate what ways might gratitude make a difference and in which ways could it have an impact given how we tend to think about the issues of climate change. A super important article that we use as a kind of a launching pad for our contention that gratitude actually matters was written now 10 years ago. It appeared in the journal Nature Climate Change. I think it's super important. It's not a long article. It's only about 6 pages, but the authors do a wonderful job at articulating why it is the case, okay, that the human judgment system is not well equipped to think about climate change in a morally urgent way. Typically, we don't see it as a moral imperative. Now, we know some do. We know the scientific community tends to, but a lot of people don't, right? And they articulate all the reasons why this is the case. And I have just 2 tables from this article, one of which is about the challenges posed by climate change to the human moral judgment system. So why is it so difficult to get people to engage in this and see it in a sense of urgency? And they say there's 6 reasons why. And I'm not going to go through all of those. I'll just mention a couple of them. And one of the things they point out is that, well, the ideas are just so abstract for a lot of people. They're not really local or concrete or specific. It's like way off in the future, so it's like, hey, 50 years, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, it's hard to think about that. They say also a lot of it's non-intuitive. Some of the findings or some of the things that you hear don't make sense logically to people, and it causes them some difficulty in ratcheting this up to a level of moral urgency. For example, back before climate change was the term, remember global warming was a term that was used a lot. But what was happening is that people were saying, oh, well, how can we have global warming when, here's all these cities that are having the coldest winter on record, and so there was this incongruity there that the average person couldn't, make sense out of those 2 things. They're saying it's global warming, but it's 50 below zero, so they would just discount the concept based on that incongruity. So that's one thing. The other is the fact that this is unintentional action that's causing these difficulties, right? Nobody wants climate change to occur or is purposely trying to make it happen. It's the result of behavior probably perceived by most people as unintentional, right, actions. And so studies suggest that unintentionally caused harms are judged less harshly than equally severe but intentionally caused ones. So again, it's part of the way the mind works. We don't intend to cause climate change, but here it is anyway. Yes, it is the consequence of our actions. And so that tends to, move it down in terms of overall moral urgency. Another one is in terms of what they call the guilty bias. When people don't want to feel guilt or bad, fear, example, when they're given messages about, how bad it is that you've done all these things, to hurt the environment, right? And so we engage in cognitive processes to minimize our, complicitness in these things. So these are just some of the reasons why it makes it very difficult to wrap our minds around the issue of climate change and why it poses a challenge to our moral judgment system. But fortunately, if we just stop there, it'd be like, throw up your hands and say, there's nothing we can do about it. They also suggest 6 things we can do, or psychological strategies that we, being, I guess, policymakers or those educators or scientists or people who have some, capacity to make a difference, that can bolster the recognition of climate change as a moral imperative. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but one of the important ones is use existing moral frameworks and moral values. So use frameworks that appeal to people, in particular groups, all right? So they give the example of efforts by religious leaders to frame climate change as a religious issue of stewardship, which can increase the salience of the subject among, audiences. Maybe you're skeptical of it, but when you phrase it in terms of that or in terms of creation care, it can resonate, with people who have beliefs that can tap into the different message framing techniques. Another one is focus. I like this one, burdens versus benefits. So studies show if you focus on the benefits for future generations, it doesn't work as well. It almost seems counterintuitive to me. I thought it would. But they've shown that compared to people who read that climate change will diminish food and clean water supplies, those who read that climate change will lead to the greater spread of infectious diseases, so increasing a burden, actually have more concern for the well-being of future generations. So if you focus on the good things future generations will get, it actually causes less concern, there's less urgency perhaps, than if you focus on all the things which could go wrong. Human suffering will go up if we don't do something. That's more morally urgent than saying, well, it's nice for them to have clean water and more food and that sort of thing. So focusing on burdens versus, and the last one that I just want to mention, this is where gratitude comes in, using emotional carrots, not sticks. So communicating the burdens that climate change places on present and future generations doesn't require generating feelings of guilt or shame or angst or other things, but rather, in fact, those things can backfire. They say appeal to hope, appeal to pride, appeal to gratitude instead, because these can drive support for climate change actions more generally. All right. So, and they give some evidence this is the case, that actually when people feel pride for their actions, taking care of the environment, or feel more hopeful about the future, or feel more grateful about the present, this actually drives pro-social behavior and taking care of things. As Wiersbe said in that quote, or as I mentioned the other day, that gratitude actually leads a person to engage in action which is more generous, more compassionate, more giving, more pro-social. So those are just some ideas that they have. I think it's a very important article. We highlight that in our little piece for Time magazine. Anyway, there actually is some research on examining the role that gratitude can play in making environmentally sound decisions. And this was a study came out in the journal Emotion last year. I don't have the link for that one, but you can easily Google David DeSteno, who was the main author, second author, but he's done a lot of work on gratitude as a moral virtue. And this particular article is quite interesting because they did an experiment. This is an experimental design where they activated people's levels of gratitude by having people recall something they were grateful for. Right? Think of a time where you were grateful. And then they had to engage in a behavior which had to do with taking from a pool of shrinking resources. So a typical laboratory experiment, here's a resource, here's how much you can take, and then did they take it fast? Did they take it slow? We know that people tend to hoard things when supplies are in short supply. Look at the beginning of the pandemic, right, where there was no toilet paper and there was no pasta on the shelves and cleaning supplies and all of those things. So the deeply ingrained human tendency is to take more for yourself when supplies run low. So you get more in the short run, but then there's less for everyone else in the long run. So this was an experiment where people had a chance to extract from a collective pool points, and they could use these points and use those to win a cash prize. So there was some motivation to draw a lot of points for yourself. What they found was those participants who were led to be grateful by engaging in a grateful reflection of a grateful memory took the same number of points no matter how quickly the pool was shrinking. But those in a control condition, they grabbed more. They took more points if the pool was shrinking very quickly. So the gratitude group refrained from overdrawing resources. And they showed that feeling happy or feeling just in a positive mood didn't have the same result. So they suggest that gratitude is beneficial, that it promotes, cooperative behavior, it promotes long-term vision, and so forth. And it suggests that, hey, there's potential here for gratitude to make a difference when it comes to action that is in the, in the interest of the environment. So just one example of a study which has examined that. Other people have been examining, there's actually a trait questionnaire. I'm not going to share that with you because we're getting short on time, where I just got an email from the researcher in Hong Kong who's developed a gratitude to nature questionnaire and shows that it's linked to positive decision-making when it comes to pro-environmental behavior, as well as actual donation to environmental causes. And he defines gratitude to nature as a sense of gratefulness and thankfulness toward nature that results from the recognition that one has benefited from its provisions. So again, does gratitude to nature make sense? Yes, it does. Now we know we can measure it. We can actually manipulate gratitude in the laboratory and show that actually makes a difference when it comes to behavioral decisions, that it could have long-term impacts when it comes to pro-environmental behavior. Okay, we're getting toward the end, so I do want to mention some questions for reflection. Let's think about this, okay? So I think we can make the case that gratitude in the context of nature, the environment, good decisions with respect to, beneficial environmental behaviors, pro-environmental attitudes is a good thing. Gratitude perhaps can be marshaled in the cause for that. Here are some specific questions, though. What are specific? And this is, we have these in the Time magazine article. We end with a bunch of bulleted points, just for reflection. Like an agenda for the future. I'm actually starting to work on a review paper which identifies not just gratitude, but other potential resources, spiritual qualities like awe, a sense of wonder, a sense of humility, perhaps hope even, and how these might be linked to both pro-environmental attitudes, but also environmentally responsible behaviors. Anyway, so what are specific ways in which environmental gratitude motivates, inspires, and drives behavior conducive to generating ecological action? There's got to be some specific ways, right? And some of the research suggests some specific things that have been examined so far, but again, a lot more needs to be done. How can the related emotions of awe and wonder, for example, be promoted to generate greater connection and appreciation for the natural world? Are these things that can be taught, like in schools, for example? It can be, from the beginning, so there's a real, organic basis for making these decisions, and perhaps, overcome some of those obstacles that Markowitz and Sharif mentioned in that article. And then, the tragedy of the commons, right, is when you take for yourself, but actually there winds up being less and less for people over time. What happens if you put grateful individuals within a group? I think this is particularly fascinating, right? How many individuals would it take to put in a group so you could actually reduce the tragedy of the commons? Hopefully they would have an impact on others. We know that emotions tend to be contagious, and that gratitude tends to spiral within organizations, within relationships and units, and so on. And that could be very interesting as well. So those are just a few ideas. There's a few more potential questions, potential problems, and also solutions that we suggest in the Time article. Okay, now you might be thinking, I don't want to go that just quite yet. This seems to put a lot of pressure on gratitude. Doesn't it? Gratitude is just such a nice, warm fuzzy feeling. I mean, do we really want to, make it work this hard? Do we want to put that much pressure on it for gratitude to carry all the weight toward a more sustainable future and more planetary flourishing and all of those things? Are we asking too much from it? So I actually want to close by considering these words from Lisa Graham McMinn, who is a Christian psychologist. Mark McMinn is her husband, and they've been very visible in their work within, trying to apply Christian theological themes to issues related to the larger picture of, the environment, environmental stewardship, and all those sorts of things. And so she wrote an article that was published in the Journal of Sociology and Christianity. And I have a quote that I want to share with you as I wrap up my time here with you today and this week. Answering the question, are we asking too much from gratitude? Perhaps not, she says. If what follows gratitude is a desire to pay attention, looking for God manifest in streams, in the setting moon, in the eyes of owls, and in each other. Perhaps what follows is a desire to partner actively with God in the ongoing unfolding of a world characterized by shalom. Peace because justice prevails. Peace because we inhabit a world of grace, which has been present from the beginning, and because we, along with all creation, are on a long journey that will eventually take us back into God's loving embrace. Right? Beautiful words. And, we conclude our Time magazine article with this sentence, and I think it's a good way to conclude the session here today, or at least my part of it. I don't think gratitude alone is going to solve all of our problems, certainly not all of our environmental problems. It's not going to, restore biodiversity or halt sea temperature increase, but also seems to me unlikely that we can solve any significant environmental problems without gratitude. I think that is a fair statement to make. And I think, gratitude, I think any significant problem, whether it's the environment or anything else that people are saying are urgent issues right now, whether it's, inflation, immigration, racism, I think we got to bring gratitude into the conversation here, because gratitude is something we know matters. We know it's a deep touch point of human existence. And if we ignore it, if we ignore gratitude, it's to our own peril, and I don't want to be an alarmist about, about our future. And there's enough voices that do that sort of thing. But I just think that it's hard to imagine solving any significant problem without gratitude in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to end there.